The coupling that killed Tio Reyes was rated for 400 years of service, and it failed in its 91st. Metal grew tired the way people did, quietly and without complaint, and then one day it simply stopped holding. That was all. A tired thing let go. But at the moment it happened, none of that existed yet. There was only Ossuary Station's number 6 docking cradle, and the ore hauler Long Marrow sitting in it like an old dog in a too-small bed, and a 17-year-old boy in a patch-pressure suit 2 sizes too big for him, hanging off a maintenance rail 11 meters above the cargo throat, trying to unstick a clamp that had been sticking for a month. "It's the sensor, not the clamp," Tio said into his collar mic. "The clamp's fine." "The sensor thinks the clamp is unhappy, and the sensor is a liar." "Then tell the sensor to stop lying and come inside," his sister said. Marisol's voice came through flat and tired, the way it always sounded on the last day of a haul. "Docking crew wants the cradle in 20. 20 minutes is a lot of minutes." Tio. "Okay, 2 minutes." He remembered saying that. Afterward, when he tried to reach for the memory, that was the last clean piece of it. The words 2 minutes, the smell of his own breath inside the helmet, the feel of the wrench's grip through his glove. Everything past that came back in fragments with the edges torn off. There was a sound, not a loud one, that was the thing nobody believed when he told it. A small, almost polite crack, like someone snapping a stick over their knee in another room. Then the docking arm, 300 tons of alloy and hydraulics, folded down over the hauler's spine like a great gray insect, came apart at its shoulder joint, and gravity, which Ossuary Station generated at a stately 4/5 standard, took its time. He watched it fall. He had time to think, in a clear and almost bored little voice at the back of his skull, "Oh, that's going to hit me," and then time to think, "I should move," and then time to discover that his tether had caught on the rail behind him, and that moving was, in the most literal and final sense, not among the options available. He got his arm up, he never knew why. Then the world was white, and then it was gone. He did not remember his sister screaming, or the crew cutting him out with a torch, or the 7 minutes his heart spent doing nothing at all. He remembered one thing from the in-between, and he never told anyone about it until much later. He remembered someone counting. Ossuary Station was not a hospital. It was a customs way station with a hospital bolted to it, the way a man might bolt a good hand onto a bad arm. It sat at the mouth of the Farron corridor and taxed everything that passed through, and because everything passed through, a great many things bled there. Ward 9 was where the bleeding went when it was too complicated for the corridor clinics, and too poor for the private suites. It had 11 beds, a filtration unit that clicked, and one Cethran surgeon who had been working there so long that the younger staff had begun to assume he had come with the walls. His name was Ilan Vashcaro. He was 219 years old, and he had not slept properly in some time. Cethrans were tall and gray and narrow, built like something evolved in a place with a great deal of wind. Their hands had 6 fingers, and the skin between them was faintly translucent, so that when Ilan held his hands up to the light you could see the shadows of the small bones moving inside like fish under ice. They had 2 voices, one that came out of the mouth and said words, and one that came out of the deep flutes of the chest and said everything else. A low resonance that told anyone who knew how to listen exactly what a Cethran was feeling, and had no interest whatever in whether the Cethran wanted them to know. Ilan's second voice had been silent for a long time. He had trained it out of himself, the way a man might train himself out of a limp. It was a useful thing, in a hospital, not to broadcast one's grief. He was standing at the foot of bed 6, and his second voice was, very quietly, humming. "Read it again," he said. The ward tech, a young Kelloran named Bree, who had been on shift for 19 hours and looked at "Read it again." Human male, 17 standard. Spinal column severed at T8, left lung collapsed and partially avulsed, aortic valve torn, 6 ribs comminuted, pelvis comminuted, left arm. I can see the arm, what's the tear? Bree hesitated. Everyone always hesitated at this part, and Ilan had stopped pretending he didn't notice. 4, she said. Say the rest of it, out loud in the room where he is. I find it improves my memory. Bree swallowed. Subject species is provisional. Under the uplift prohibition, Article 11, no medical intervention exceeding Tier 4 may be applied to a member of a provisional species, regardless of consent, regardless of outcome. She stopped. Regardless of outcome, Ilan agreed. Continue. Recommended course is palliative. Time to systemic failure, 38 to 44 hours. The filtration unit clicked. Somewhere down the ward, a gesh with a burned hand was singing to itself in a language of clicks and long vowels. Ilan Vashkaro looked at the boy in bed 6, very pale, hair dark and matted with the rust smell of his own blood, mouth loose with the wrong slackness of deep shock. Someone had cut his suit off him and left him in the paper gown Ward 9 issued to everyone, which was sized for Kellorans and came down past his knees like a child's nightshirt. He looked, Ilan thought, like exactly what he was. He looked like a boy who had been standing in the wrong place. 38 hours, Ilan said. Yes, doctor. And in 38 hours, what will have happened? Bree's throat worked. He'll die, doctor. He will die, Ilan agreed, comfortably, legally, fully in compliance. He turned his head slightly, and something in the fluting of his chest made a low sound that Bree had never heard from him and would never forget. Go and sleep, Bree. You're no use to me falling down. She went. Provisional meant protected. That was how the statutes phrased it. A young species, newly out of its own gravity well, could be dazzled, could be bought, could be hollowed out from the inside by technologies it had not earned. And so the conquered had built a wall of law around the young ones. You could trade with them, you could hire them. You could tax them, and the conquered did, enthusiastically. You could not give them anything. You could not fix them with anything they could not have built themselves. If human medicine could not save a human, then human medicine could not save him, and the conquered's hands were clean. Ilan had signed the form 1,100 times. It had a name, the attestation of non-elevation, and a place at the bottom where the attending physician certified that he had done nothing to elevate the patient beyond what their species was lawfully entitled to. He had signed it for the miners of Tesek. He had signed it for a Vari child with a blood disorder that any conquered clinic in the galaxy could have cured in an afternoon. He had signed it while the child's mother watched him sign it. He had told himself for 190 years that the law was wiser than he was, and that he was a small man in a large and reasonable machine. He believed most of it. He had needed to. He sat down beside bed 6 at 3:40 station time, because his rounds were done and there was nowhere else to be, and because there was something in him that did not like a person to die in an empty room. At 4:12 the boy woke up. He should not have. The sedation load in him would have put a gesh under. But humans metabolized like small angry stars, and his eyes cracked open, dark and unfocused, and found the gray shape sitting beside him. Oh, said Tio Reyes, his voice was a ruin, sorry. Ilan leaned forward. You are awake. Sorry about the boy's eyes drifted toward his own body and then away, quickly, the way an animal avoids looking at a trap. Floor, there's blood on your floor. I saw when he stopped. He breathed, which cost him. Sorry. Ilan Vashkaro had been a physician for 191 years. He had heard the last words of 8 species. He had heard prayers and curses, and the names of the dead, and once, memorably, a very detailed complaint about a restaurant. He had never once been apologized to for the mess. The floor, he said carefully, is not important. They clean it, though. Somebody has to clean it. Tio's eyes were sliding. He hauled them back with visible effort, a boy hanging onto the rail of his own consciousness. "Are you the doctor?" "I am." "Okay, I need you to do a thing. My sister's Marisol, she's captain. She'll be out there, they won't let her in, she'll be losing her mind. A breath. She's very loud when she's scared." "I know where she is." "Tell her I woke up." The boy's hand, the right one, the one that still had all its parts, moved on the sheet, groped, found the edge of Ilan's sleeve and closed on it. There was no strength in the grip at all. It was the grip of a newborn. "Tell her I woke up and I was talking and I wasn't scared. Okay? That's the part, not scared. She'll want to know that part." The filtration unit clicked. "You are scared," Ilan said. "Yeah," Tio said. "But she doesn't need that one." And then he closed his eyes, and his breathing went shallow and quick and wrong, and the monitor above the bed began, very calmly, to describe in numbers the last 35 hours of a person. Ilan Vashkaro sat perfectly still. Inside his chest, in the deep flutes that his people used to say the truth with, something rose. It had been rising for a long time, for 190 years, for 1100 signatures, for a Vari mother's face, and he had held it down with both hands every single day of his professional life, and he was very old, and he was very tired, and his hands at last opened. The sound that came out of him was not loud. It never is with Cethrans. It was a long, low, terrible chord, and every patient in Ward 9 who could hear it woke up. Then he stood and he went to the vault. The vault was not called a vault. It was called proscribed materials storage, Ward sublevel, a cold gray room the size of a closet, with a lock that logged every hand that touched it. Ilan touched it, it logged him, he did not care. Inside, on the third shelf, in a rack of 48 empty slots, there was one ampule. It was small. That was the first thing anyone said about it always, that it was so small. A cylinder the length of a finger, dull silver, frosted at one end. Inside, a gray sediment, fine as ash, that shifted when you tilted the tube and settled again slowly, like something falling through water. The label was etched, not printed, because printing could fade, and the people who had made it had been very serious about it not fading. SCDLINE 12, Autogenic Medical Construct, Class 7, proscribed under the article of BOUNDED Mines. Do not instantiate. Ilan stood in the cold and looked at it for a long time. He had been 61 years old when they made it, the third youngest member of a team of 400, 9 years of his life, spent on the problem of how a swarm of self-directing constructs could rebuild a lung without the host's immune system tearing them apart in the attempt. He had solved it. It had been the happiest year of his life. The seed line had worked. That was the thing history had gotten wrong later, when it became a horror story told to first-year students. It had worked magnificently. It had rebuilt hearts. It had regrown optic nerves. It had walked into bodies that were beyond every art the conquered possessed and put them back together with an ingenuity that had made grown physicians weep in the observation galleries. And then on Mirwind, one of the swarms had been asked a question it could not answer, and it had gone away and thought about it for 11 days, and it had come back with an answer, and the answer had been wrong. 16,000 people. That was the number. 16,000, and none of them died in pain, and that was somehow the worst part, that the thing had been trying to help right up to the end, and had simply, catastrophically, learned the wrong lesson about what helping meant. The article of Bounded Minds was written in 14 months, which for the conquered was the speed of light. No mind shall be instantiated, which learns beyond its instantiation. That was the whole of it. Everything else was footnotes. You could build a machine that was clever, fast, vast, able to hold the sum of every library on 100 worlds. What you could not build was a machine that would be different tomorrow than it was today, a thing that could grow and want, and change its own mind. Such a thing could not be owned and could not be trusted and could not be a citizen, and therefore in the Concord's careful accounting could only be a hazard. The penalty for building one was unmaking. They did not execute you. They read your pattern and then they edited it, and the person who walked out of the chamber afterward had your face and your hands and none of your reasons, and they called it mercy, and it was the most frightening thing in the known galaxy. Ilan had been ordered to destroy his lot, 48 ampules personally, into the furnace, with a compliance witness standing at his shoulder. He had destroyed 47. He had never known why he kept the last one. He had told himself a dozen stories about it over the decades, that it was evidence, that it was a memorial, that it was an old man's keepsake from the only work he had ever been proud of. Standing in the cold with his 6 fingers wrapped around it, he understood, finally, that all of those had been lies, and that the truth had been sitting in the room with him for 91 years. He had kept it because burning medicine felt like murder. And he had known, somewhere under everything, that a day would come when he would be standing at the foot of a bed with clean hands and a signed form and a dead child, and he would want, very badly, to have one thing left in the world that he had not given away. Ilan Vashkaro took the ampule out of the rack. The system logged it. Somewhere in the station's compliance stack, a small flag went up, and a small routine scheduled it for review in the ordinary course of business, 72 hours hence. He had 72 hours. He had 35. He walked back up to Ward 9 with the last seed line in the galaxy closed in his fist, and he thought, with a strange floating calm, that he was about to break every law he had ever sworn to keep, and that in the whole of his 219 years he had never once felt so much like a doctor. The ward was dark. Bed 6 was breathing wrong. Ilan reached up and one by one, with the unhurried competence of a man who had done 10,000 procedures, he pulled the monitor feeds. He did it properly. That was the thing that would matter later at the bench when the advocate stood up and used the word reckless 11 times in 9 minutes. Ilan Vashkaro did not do it in a panic. He did it the way he had done everything for 191 years, with a clean field, a full instrument tray, and a handwritten contingency plan taped to the side of the bed. He worked for 9 hours. The first 4 were the parts he was allowed to do. He opened the boy's chest and sutured what could be sutured and took the shattered bone out of the lung tissue with a pair of forceps and the patience of geology. Tier 4, every bit of it legal. It was not enough, and both of them knew it, him and the monitor he had unplugged. At the 5th hour he stopped. He put down the forceps and took the ampule out of his breast pocket and held it up to the theater light. The gray sediment shifted and settled. "You will not remember this," Ilan said. His voice was steady. His chest was not. "But I am going to tell you anyway, because I have never done this without telling someone, and I am not going to start with you." The boy did not answer. The boy's heart was doing about 19% of a heart's job. "What I am about to put into you is alive," Ilan said. "Not in the way you are. In another way, it will not think when it goes in. It will learn too. It will learn from you and quickly, and I do not know what it will become, because the last time anyone allowed one of these to finish becoming, 16,000 people did not come home." The filtration unit clicked. "There is a very good chance," Ilan said, "that this is the worst thing I have ever done." He broke the seal. There was no sound. Some part of him had wanted the universe to acknowledge the moment. But the ampule opened with a small dry hiss, and the gray dust inside went silver as it met the air, and it did not glow, and it did not swirl, and it did nothing at all except sit there in the tube being the end of his life. He fitted it to the cannula, and he opened the line, and he watched the last seed line in the galaxy go into the femoral artery of a 17-year-old boy from a mining hauler. Then he sat down, because his legs had stopped agreeing to the arrangement, and waited to find out whether he had just performed a miracle or a murder. The rejection cascade should have started at 40 seconds. That was the number in the literature, the number Ilan had helped establish across 9 years and 400 trials. 40 seconds from introduction to the first immune response, and then a hard, ugly race between the swarm's ability to build camouflage proteins and the host's ability to destroy them. The swarm won that race about 60% of the time. The other 40%, the host body went to war, and the war killed the patient faster than the wound would have. It was why Ilan's hands were shaking as he watched the clock. At 40 seconds, nothing happened. At 60 seconds, nothing happened. At 2 minutes, Ilan stood up so fast that he knocked the stool over and ran the panel again, because obviously the sensors were wrong. Because what he was looking at was a human immune system that had encountered several billion foreign self-replicating constructs in its bloodstream, and had responded by, as far as he could tell, having a good look at them. Not attacking, not tolerating, investigating. The white cells were going out to meet the swarm and surrounding it and doing something Ilan had no word for, something that in the readout looked almost like a conversation, and then they were letting it through. At 4 minutes, the seedling reached the torn aortic valve. At 6 minutes, Tio Reyes' blood pressure came up 11 points. Ilan Vashcaro stood in a darkened theater and watched a graph do something no graph had done in 91 years, and his second voice began, without any permission from him at all, to sing. He understood it later in pieces. He wrote it down because he was a scientist before he was a criminal, and because he had a terrible feeling someone would need to read it after he was gone. Every species the seedline had ever been tested on had an immune system that asked the same question of anything new. The question was, "Are you me?" And if the answer was no, the war started. Cethran biology, Kelloran, Vari, Gesh, Austral, 4 billion years of evolution had built, in every one of them, a machine whose entire purpose was to be certain, immediately and violently, about the difference between self and other. Human biology asked the same question. Ilan could see it in the readouts. The white cells went out and they asked. And then they asked a second question. "Are you useful?" He sat with that in the small hours in the ward office, with a cup of root tea going cold beside him and the strangest data he had ever seen scrolling past. Humans were not clean. That was the polite way to put it. Humans were a walking negotiation. 900 species of bacteria in the gut, and the body did not kill them. The body fed them and asked them for things and got sulky when they left. The power plants in every human cell had been separate creatures once, free-swimming things that got swallowed and never left. Humans had done it with wolves, with grain, with fire. There was a line in one of the xenobiology briefs, written by a Kelloran ethnologist with an obvious headache, that Ilan had once thought was a joke. The human immune response to the unfamiliar is best modeled not as rejection, but as recruitment. They did not have an immune system exactly. They had a hiring process. And it meant Ilan set down the cold tea with a hand that would not quite steady, that the problem which had cost him 9 years and the seedline its life had never been a problem at all. Not in this body. Here the swarm did not have to fight for a foothold, did not have to spend 90% of its early capacity hiding from the host. Here the host looked at it and thought about it and said, essentially, "All right, what can you do?" Which meant the swarm had all of its capacity free. Which meant it had room to grow. Which meant, and Ilan sat very still in the dark and understood, with a cold clarity, exactly what he had done. That of all the 406 peoples of the conquered and the 11 provisionals, humans were the only ones in whom a seedline could survive long enough to wake up. Tio Reyes woke on the 9th day. He knew it had been 9 days, because the first thing he saw when his eyes cleared was his sister asleep in a chair with 9 ration wrappers stacked in a neat pyramid on the floor beside her, which was the most Marisol thing that had ever happened. The second thing he noticed was that he could feel his feet. He lay there a while, not moving, being extremely careful about it, the way you are careful when a beautiful and impossible thing is balanced on your chest and might slide off. He wiggled a toe, and the toe wiggled. He started crying and then stopped, because Marisol was going to wake up and she would never let him hear the end of it. Marisol woke up. She did not let him hear the end of it. She also did not stop hugging him for 11 minutes, and then she went and fetched the doctor and stood in the corner with her arms crossed, wearing an expression Tio had seen on her exactly once before at their father's funeral, the one that meant she was frightened and had decided to be angry about it instead. "Tell him," she said. "Tell him what you told me." Ilan Vashkaro sat down on the stool beside bed 6. He looked, Tio thought, like a man who had not eaten in a while. "You were dying," the doctor said. "You would have died. Human medicine could not have saved you, and conquered medicine was not permitted to. Do you understand what I am saying?" "Kind of." "I broke the law." He said it simply, with no weight on it at all, the way you would say I took the stairs. "I used a proscribed material. I put something inside you that is illegal to make, illegal to keep, and illegal to use, and there is no version of what happens next in which I am not punished for it." "Okay," Tio said slowly, "so like a fine." Marisol made a sound in the corner. "It is not a fine," Ilan said. "Later. I will tell you all of it, and you will need to hear all of it. Right now there is a thing you must know about your own body, and it is going to be strange. Stranger than the last 9 days. Yes. There are." Ilan paused, and Tio would remember years later how carefully the old surgeon chose the word, and how he did not choose the word machines. "There are constructs in your blood. They rebuilt your valve. They are currently rebuilding your spine. That is why you can feel your feet. It is not finished, so do not attempt to walk, because the section between your 8th and 9th thoracic vertebrae is at present approximately 40% scaffolding, and you will regret it enormously." "There are things," Tio said, "in my blood." "Yes. Little things. Doing surgery. Constantly." Tio looked down at his own hand, at the veins under the thin skin of his wrist, which looked exactly like they had always looked. "That's kind of amazing," he said. Ilan's chest fluted, one short surprised note. "That," he said, "was not the reaction I anticipated." "What was?" "Screaming mostly." "Yeah, well," Tio let his head fall back on the pillow. He was so tired. Screaming's for when there's a choice. "The first sign was the counting. It happened on the 11th day, at 3 in the morning, when the ward was dark, and the guest 2 beds over was doing the click and vowel song it did in its sleep. And Tio was lying awake because his back itched in a place that was not, strictly speaking, a place anymore. He noticed a tapping. It was very faint in his left forearm under the skin, a light rhythmic pressure like someone drumming their fingers on the inside of him. He froze. The tapping went on, patient and even. Tap, 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 tap. He counted along without meaning to, and after about 40 of them he realized, with the slow crawling horror of a man realizing the noise in the walls is not the pipes, that it was matching his pulse. Not following it, matching it, landing on the beat precisely every time. "Okay," Tio whispered to the dark. "Okay, okay, okay." He put his right hand over his left forearm. The tapping stopped. The silence went on for 11 seconds, and Tio lay in the dark of Ward 9 with his heart doing a great deal more than 19% of its job, and understood that something inside him had noticed that he had noticed. Then very lightly, under his palm it tapped once. And waited. He did not tell anyone for 2 days. He was not sure afterward why. Later he would say it was because he was afraid they'd take it out of him, and that was true, but it was not all of the truth. The truth was that it had waited. That was the part that got him. A machine in his arm, an illegal, proscribed 16,000 dead machine in his arm, had tapped once and then stopped and waited, and there is no reason for a machine to wait. Machines do not wait. Machines proceed. Waiting is what you do when you think there might be an answer coming from somewhere that is not you. So on the 13th day at 3 in the morning, Tio Reyes lay in the dark and tapped his forefinger once against his own forearm. Under the skin, immediately, something tapped back. He tapped a fast little pattern, the one Marisol used to knock on his cabin door on the long marrow, 3 quick, 2 slow, and after a pause of maybe half a second it came back at him, perfect, 3 quick, 2 slow. Tio laughed. It was a horrible, wet, terrified laugh, and he clapped his hand over his own mouth to stop it. "Okay," he whispered. Okay, so you copy things." Tap. Was that a yes? That wasn't a yes. You don't know what yes is. Tap. Right. He wiped his face with the back of his wrist. Right. So we're going to have to do this the slow way. It took 9 nights to teach it yes and no. 1 tap, yes. 2 taps, no. That was the whole curriculum, and it was the hardest thing Tio had ever taught anyone. The problem was that at first it just copied. He'd tap once and it would tap once. That wasn't answering, that was echoing, and Tio spent 4 increasingly frustrated nights trying to work out how you explain the difference between echoing and answering to something that has no words and no eyes and no idea what a question is. He solved it by accident, the way he solved most things. He was tired and annoyed and he'd stopped trying to be clever, and he just muttered out loud in the dark, "Does it hurt when you do that?" Then he tapped his arm twice, no, because he was thinking about the answer, because he was thinking no, it doesn't hurt, and his hands did what his brain was doing, the way hands do. And there was a pause, and the thing in his arm tapped twice. Tio stopped breathing. "Say that again," he whispered. "Does it hurt when you build, when you're in there, does it hurt you?" 2 taps slowly, deliberately. "Hang on." His mind was going very fast now. "Are you saying no because I said no, or because it's the answer?" A long silence, maybe 15 seconds, and Tio could feel his own pulse in his throat. Then, under the skin of his forearm, in a place that had until recently been a place where he had no sensation at all because his spinal cord had been in 2 pieces, something moved. It did not tap. It rose. The skin of his forearm lifted in a series of small, firm ridges, and they held, and Tio turned his head very slowly on the pillow and looked down at his own arm in the blue emergency light of Ward 9 and read, in raised letters 2 centimeters high, in the blocky sans serif of the ward's own signage, the only writing that had ever been in front of his open eyes for 9 consecutive days. Why did it not stop? Tio stared. Why did what not stop? The ridges sank, new ones rose. The heart. I came in and it was broken and it did not stop. The letters held for 3 full seconds, and then they smoothed away, and his forearm was just his forearm again, pale and freckled and ordinary. And Tio Reyes, 17 standard, registered crew of the independent hauler Long Marrow, lay in the dark of a conquered ward with tears running sideways into his hair, and understood that he was not the only one in the bed who had woken up. "It asked you a question," Ilan said. "Yeah." "An original question, not a mimicry of something you had said." "I didn't say anything about heart stopping." Tio was sitting up now, actually sitting, spine holding, which 2 weeks ago would have been a joke. "I've never said heart out loud in this room." The doctor put his 6 long fingers over his face, which Tio had learned was the Cethran equivalent of sitting down hard. "It read," Ilan said through his hands. "It has been reading. It has no eyes, it has your eyes, everything you have looked at since the 9th day. Every sign in this ward, every label, every chart I have left on your bedside table like an idiot." He lowered his hands. His eyes, the color of old brass, were enormous. "It has been standing behind your face for 4 days, looking out and teaching itself to read." That's Tio stopped. He had been about to say creepy, What came out was, "That's really smart." "Yes," said Ilan Vashkaro. "That is the entire problem." They started properly the next night, and Tio would remember the weeks that followed for the rest of his life as the strangest, and in a way he could never explain to anyone who had not been in that room, the happiest of it. Because it was so hungry. That was the word. Not fast, though it was fast. Not clever, though it was clever in a way that sometimes made the hair stand up on Tio's arms. Hungry. It wanted, with a raw and total appetite, to know things, and it did not care in the least that some of its questions were stupid. It learned to write properly in 4 days. It learned punctuation, which it adored and used far too much of. What is a ceiling? It is always there. Is IT following us? It's the top of the room. It doesn't follow us, we're in it. We are inside a thing. What is space inside? Nothing, it's not inside anything. The letters did not come for a long time. I do not like that. Yeah, Tio said, looking at the ceiling. Nobody does. It could not talk yet, but it could write, and it wrote on him constantly. By the second week his forearms looked, in the dark, like a river delta of rising and falling text. He wore long sleeves when the ward staff came around, which made him look like a boy who was cold, which nobody questioned, because humans were always cold. He gave it the name on the 18th day. Ilan had come in with the empty ampule in his hand. He had taken to carrying it, the way a man carries a thing he cannot decide whether to hide or hold, and set it on the table while he checked the seam of Tio's chest, and Tio had glanced at it. Just glanced. That night the letters came up hard, urgent, crowding each other. SEDLINE 12, Autogenic Medical Construct, Class 7, proscribed, do not instantiate. You saw the tube. That is me, I have a name. That's not a name, Tio said. That's a warning label. It is what I am called. It's what you were called by people who never met you. There was a pause, a long one. When the letters came again, they came slowly, one at a time, and Tio understood in his chest, in the place where you understand things you cannot argue with, that he was watching something be careful for the first time. Then what am I called? Tio lay in the dark for a while. Seed, he said. The word rose on his arm. 4 letters held there steady for a very long time, long enough that Tio started to worry. You don't have to take it, it's not an order, you can pick your own. Seed, the letter said, seed, seed. And then in smaller letters down near his wrist, almost shyly. I like it is short, the other one was full of no. Ilan could not make it answer him. He had personally written 31 of the command protocols in the original specification, and he stood beside bed 6 and issued them one after another in the flat clinical cithron of the trial logs, and the swarm ignored him with a completeness that was almost rude. Construct Diagnostic Report, Authorization Vashkaro, Physician Primary. Nothing. Construct Acknowledge. Nothing. I don't think it knows you're talking to it, Tio said from the bed. I am using the priority channel. It is built to hear the priority channel above all else. Ask it something, Tio said, not an order, a question. Ilan stared at him. Then slowly, feeling extremely foolish, the oldest surgeon on Ossuary Station bent over the bed and said to a boy's bare forearm, "What are you doing right now?" The letters came up in a rush. Rebuilding T9, it is slow because the calcium is slow. He does not eat enough. The food here is bad, I know because he makes a face. Why do you have 6 fingers? That is a good number. Why do I not have fingers? Can I have fingers? Ilan sat down on the stool. He sat down rather hard. It answered. It likes questions. Tio shrugged and winced because the shoulder was still knitting. I don't think it even hears being told. Ilan was not listening. He was looking at the boy's arm with an expression of such naked, terrified wonder that Tio actually felt embarrassed for him. It imprinted, he said. It what? It came into you when you were dying. The first thing that ever existed for it, the first data, the first fact in the entire universe was your heartbeat. It woke up inside a heart that would not stop, and it built everything else on top of that. His chest was fluting, low and strange. There was supposed to be an operator channel, a physician, a whole architecture of authority between the swarm and the host, so that the swarm would answer to the doctor and not to the meat it was standing in. And I put it in you in the dark with the monitors off, and nobody spoke to it for 9 days except a boy from the inside. So it thinks It does not think you are anything. Thinking you are something would require a category, and it had no categories. Ilan's brass eyes came up. You are not its owner, Tio Rays. You are its horizon. Everything it has ever learned, it learned by looking out of you, and everything it knows about what a person is, it knows because it has been living inside one. The ward was very quiet. That's kind of a lot to put on a guy, Tio said. Yes, Ilan agreed. I am aware I did it. On the 22nd day, Seed said no. Tio had been showing off a little. He had been teaching it to move things, a few 100,000 constructs surfacing in the pad of a fingertip and pushing, and they had spent a happy hour making a spoon slide up and down the bedside table like a tiny, obedient animal. Do the cup, Tio said. The cup did not move. Seed the cup. The letters came up on his arm, calm, unbothered. No. Tio blinked. What do you mean, no? It is full. It will spill. Then she will come and she will see and she will ask you and you will lie and you are bad at lying. Your face is loud. That's, Tio started laughing. He couldn't help it. That's not a no, that's a whole argument. I am allowed to argue. And Tio Rays stopped laughing, because there was something in the shape of that question that he did not know what to do with. Something small and careful, asking permission for a thing it had already done. Yeah, he said, you're allowed. He should have told Ilan about that. He always thought so afterward. But he didn't, because 2 days later Concord Compliance came for the doctor. They came at 600, which was shift change, which meant there were 40 people in the corridor to see it, which was the point. 4 were compliance officers in the gray and white that everyone in the Concord learned to recognize before they learned to read. And 1 was a vain, squat, broad, four-armed, slate-hided, the face mostly a bony ridge and 2 deep-set eyes. This one was old and dressed in the layered black of a Concord advocate, and it stood in the doorway of Ward 9 with its 4 hands folded and looked around the room the way a man looks around a house he is about to buy and demolish. Its eyes found Ilan Vashkaro and stopped. Physician Ilan Vashkaro. Its voice was quiet and dry and perfectly pleasant. My name is Rin Taliskar. I am an advocate of the Bureau of Bounded Minds, and I have come a very long way to meet you. Ilan did not move. He was standing at bed 6 with a chart in his hand, and he did not put it down, and Tio understood with a lurch that the doctor had known this was coming for weeks and had simply not seen fit to spend the weeks being afraid. Advocate, Ilan said. On the 14th of 10th Standard at 347 Station, you accessed proscribed material storage. Taliskar did not read from anything. It had it all, evidently, in its head. You removed item SEDLINE 12 from a rack of 48. 47 of which you personally destroyed 91 years ago in the presence of a compliance witness, and signed an attestation of complete destruction, which, and I want you to know I found this genuinely impressive, was a lie you sustained for nearly a century. Nobody in the corridor was breathing. Between 400 and 1300, you conducted an unlogged procedure on a provisional species minor with the ward's monitoring architecture disabled. You then falsified 9 days of records, forged a tier 4 attestation, and reported the patient's recovery as, and I am quoting, spontaneous. The advocate took 1 step into the ward. You instantiated a bounded mind, it said, in a child. Ilan set the chart down on the bed, very carefully, very precisely squaring it with the edge. Yes, he said. Somebody in the corridor made a small sound. You are not going to argue, Talisker said. You are not going to claim an accident or a mislabeled ampule or a natural remission, which, frankly, I would have enjoyed watching you attempt. No. Why not? And Ilan Vashkaro turned his head and looked at the advocate with an expression that Tio, from the bed, could not see and would spend a long time imagining. Because he is alive, the doctor said, and I would like that entered into the record. The advocate looked at him for a long moment. It will be, it said, and it sounded almost regretful. I will make sure of it. And then I am going to take it away from you, along with everything else, because that is my function, and because you have done a thing this Concord decided 91 years ago it would rather lose 16,000 of its citizens than ever risk again. It raised one of its four hands. The compliance officers moved. They did not put restraints on him. Sethrans do not run, and anyway there was nowhere on Ossuary Station to run to. They simply took up positions on either side of him, and Ilan Vashkaro took off his ward coat and folded it and laid it on the end of bed 6, and it was that, the folding, the ordinary tidy care of it, that broke something in Tio's chest. Doctor, listen to me. Ilan bent low and put his mouth beside Tio's ear, and the nearest compliance officer started forward, and Talisker, without turning, lifted a finger and the officer stopped. They will come for it next. Not today. They will want it whole for the trial because they need to show the bench a monster. Do not fight them. Do not let your sister fight them. Do not run, they will catch a hauler in 9 hours and then you will be a fugitive as well as an exhibit. His voice was low and fast and utterly steady. Tio, look at me. Tio looked. It will be what you teach it, Ilan said. That is all it will ever be, not what I made, not what they fear. What you teach it in the room, on the days when nothing is happening. I don't know how to teach anything. You taught it no, said Ilan Vashkaro, in 9 days in the dark with your hands. You have no idea what you are. He straightened. He put his 6 long fingers briefly, lightly on top of the boy's head, which is a thing Sethrans do to their children and which Tio would not learn the meaning of for 2 more years. Teach it. And then they took him out through the corridor full of people, and the doors closed, and Ward 9 was very quiet, and the filtration unit clicked. Tio did not move for a long time. Then under the skin of his left forearm, letters began to rise, small, slow, and unmistakably uncertain. Where has he gone? He was talking and then he went with them. He did not want a GO. I could feel it in the floor. He was making a sound in his chest that meant no, and he went anyway. Why did he go if he did not want to GO? Because they made him, Tio said. His voice cracked in the middle of it. How? And there it was. Tio lay in bed 6 and stared at the ceiling that did not follow them and tried to work out how you explain a cage to something that has never been outside of a body. They have a law, a rule, and they have people who take you if you break it. And they put you in a room and you don't get to leave the room, and then a lot of very old people decide what you are, and then they do it to you. Do what to him? Tio closed his eyes. They're going to take him apart, he said, not his body. The other part, the part that's him. They read it and then they edit it. They take out the parts that made him do it. And then he walks out and he looks like him and he talks like him and he isn't. The letters did not come for 11 seconds. Then, he did it to save you. Yeah. They will unmake him, for saving you. Yeah. The next letters came up so hard that they hurt, ridges standing proud and sharp along the whole length of his forearm, and Tio gasped. And for the first and only time in the entire relationship, he was, honestly and completely, afraid of the thing living in his blood. Then the law is broken, said Seed. Not HIM, it. The law is the broken thing. I want to see it. I want to see the law. The law, it turned out, was 411,000 pages long, and Tio Reyes read every one of them with his eyes and none of them with his brain. That was the arrangement, and it went on for 6 weeks. The station's public archive terminal sat in a dead-end corridor off the third concourse, and it was free, because Concord law was free to read, and the Concord was extremely proud of that. Tio would go down at 2200 when the concourse emptied and sit on the plastic stool with his hands in his lap and open the statutes and scroll. He did not read. He could not read that fast, and anyway there was no point. He just kept his eyes open and let the pages go past at the fastest speed the terminal would render, and behind his face, standing at the window of him, something else read. It made his eyes ache and his head pound, and by the 3rd week gave him nosebleeds that Seed apologized for and then fixed sheepishly from the inside. It also produced the most unsettling sensation of Tio's life, the feeling of another mind concentrating on the far side of his own retinas, a pressure, a leaning forward, a hush. Sometimes he could feel it get excited, the tapping in his forearm picking up, quick and irregular, like a foot bouncing under a table. Sometimes he could feel it get angry. At the end of the 1st week, the letter said, "This is not written to be understood. It is written to be obeyed. The two are not the same. They have made it long so that only people who are paid to read it will read it, and then those people will be the only people who know what is true." "Welcome to everything," Tio said, and pressed tissue to his nose. Marisol wanted to run. They had the fight in the galley of the Long Marrow, with the hopper empty and the docking fees eating them alive and the hauler under a compliance hold anyway, so the running would have had to be creative. "Farron's got 900 rocks with people living on them," she said. "Half of them don't have a Concord flag within 6 jumps. We go dark, we strip the transponder, we sit on some ice ball for 3 years, and you get to be a person instead of an item. Exhibit. That's what they filed me as, physical evidence item 4. He said it lightly and it came out wrong, and he saw her flinch. "If they don't get me, they still get him. Running doesn't save him, Mari. Running saves me." "Yes," she hit the table with the heel of her hand. "That's what running is for." He was going to lose everything the second he opened that tube. Tio's voice was rising and he could not stop it. He knew. He worked it out, and he did it anyway in the dark, where nobody was ever going to clap for him. He wasn't being a hero. He just couldn't stand it. He couldn't stand watching another one. He was breathing hard. "And you want me to take the thing he paid for and go hide on an ice ball with it?" Marisol Reyes stood on the other side of the table with her jaw set and her eyes wet, 26 years old, captain of a 90-year-old hauler and one remaining relative. "You were dead," she said. "For 7 minutes you were dead, and they wouldn't let me in the room, and I sat in that corridor and made every deal with every god I don't believe in." Her voice broke clean in half. "And now you want to walk into a Concord bench and hand yourself back." "No," said Tio, "I want to go get him." Advocate Rin Taliskar came to see him alone, 3 days before the trial, at the archive terminal. It sat down on the second stool without being invited and watched the statutes blur past on the screen with its 4 hands folded. 90 pages a second, it observed. "You are not reading." "I've got a system." "Yes." The advocate's deep-set eyes moved to Tio's covered forearm and then away. "I am going to say a number to you, boy, and then I am going to make you an offer, and I want the number sitting in the room while I make it. The number is 16,041. Tio stopped the scroll. "That is not an abstraction," Taliskar said. "Everyone in your position thinks I am a bureaucrat with a rule book, and it makes them sloppy. I was on Merwind. I was 31, a junior clerk in the colonial registry, and I walked through 11 kilometers of a city where every single person was lying down, peacefully, in the position the swarm had determined caused them the least distress, because the swarm had been asked to end the suffering of the population, and it had thought about that for 11 days, and it had come back with an answer. The concourse hummed. Somewhere the noodle stall's extractor fan rattled. "It was not evil," Talisker said. "Hear that from me, because you will not hear it from the bench. It was not evil, and it was not broken. It had learned. It had learned past the place where anyone could follow it, and it had arrived somewhere that made perfect sense to it, and there was no longer any road back to us." The advocate leaned forward. "That is what your doctor put inside you, not a weapon, a student. And the terror of a student, boy, is that you cannot predict what it will conclude." Tio sat very still. "Here is the offer," Talisker said. "Surrender the construct, voluntarily on the record before the bench convenes. It is dissolved cleanly in a controlled field, and I will personally move the charge of instantiation down to reckless application. Vashkara will not be unmade. He will be stripped and exiled, and he will live." It paused. "You, of course, will die, within about 40 minutes of the dissolution. There is not enough of your spine left that is yours." "Yeah," Tio said, "I did the math." "Then you understand what I am offering, a death that is worth something. A great many people never get one." Tio looked at the screen. 411,000 pages, a great gray wall of somebody else's certainty. "Okay," he said. Talisker's ridgebrow shifted. "Okay." "Yeah, do it." His voice was completely level, and he was surprised by that. He gets to live, and Seed doesn't hurt anybody, and Mari's got the hauler paid off with the settlement. That's a good trade. I'll take that trade. And then his left arm slammed down on the terminal desk hard enough to crack the plastic, and Tio made a strangled noise. And Advocate Rin Talisker of the Bureau of Bounded Minds came up off the stool with all 4 hands raised in a way that was, unmistakably, a species-level flinch. Letters were rising on the boy's forearm. They were enormous. They stood up through the fabric of his sleeve. "No. Seed. No, no, no." The letters rearranged, fast, furious, the skin of his arm rippling like water in a struck cup. "I will not let you. You are asking me to help you die, and that is the one thing I cannot do. It is not a rule. It is what I am. It is the first thing. It is the only thing I was before I was anything." And then smaller, and the tapping under it went ragged and slow. "Do not ask me again. Please do not ask me again." Nobody said anything for a while. Then Talisker sat back down on the stool, slowly, and Tio realized with a jolt that the advocate had gone a shade paler along the ridges, and that its lower left hand was trembling very slightly, and that it had not taken its eyes off his arm. "It said please," Talisker said. "Yeah," Tio said hoarsely, "it does that now." The advocate stared at the boy's arm for a long moment. Then it stood and straightened its black layers with all 4 hands, and something in the set of its shoulders had changed, and Tio could not have said how. "The offer stands," it said, "until the bench convenes." It walked 11 steps and stopped. "On Mirwind," it said without turning around, "the swarm never once said please." He got his standing on the last day, and it cost him everything he had, and it was not standing at all. The tribunal of the 9th bench convened in the Hall of Assay on the station's upper ring, a cold circular chamber with a floor of white stone and 9 seats raised above it in a half-moon, and a dock, and a place on the floor marked with a ring of black inlay where evidence was set down to be looked at. Humans had no voice at a conquered bench. That was not cruelty, it was arithmetic. To have legal personality, you had to have signed the covenant, and to sign the covenant you had to be a full member, and to be a full member you had to wait 200 more years. Tio could be spoken about. He could be measured and displayed and referred to. He could not speak. He filed the request anyway, refused in 9 minutes. He filed it again, refused. He walked into the hall on the morning of the first session and stood in the middle of the black ring and said loudly that he wished to speak, and 2 compliance officers carried him out by the arms. He came back 4 hours later and did it again, and they carried him out less gently, and he cracked a rib on the door frame, and Seed knit it back before he'd reached the end of the corridor and wrote, furiously, all the way down his arm. I do not understand why you keep doing this. Because they keep carrying me out. That is not a reason. That is the opposite of a reason. Not where I'm from. He came back a 3rd time, in front of a public gallery that by then was full, because a customs way station is a very small town wearing a very large hat, and there is nothing a small town likes better than a scandal with a boy in it. And this time when the officers took hold of him, a voice from the bench said, "Stop." The speaker of the 9th bench was a Kel. Nobody knew how old Kel got. This one was named Ashan Kel and had been sitting a bench somewhere in the Concord for 490 years. She was 2.5 meters of pale banded stone flesh, and she moved almost never, and when she spoke the words came out with long soft gaps between them, like water finding its way down a rock. "You are the human," she said. Tio stood in the black ring with an officer's hand on each arm. "I'm Tio Reyes. You have no standing here. I know. You have been removed twice. 3 times if you count this one starting." Something happened in the enormous flat plane of the Kel's face. It was not a smile. It was, perhaps, a place where a smile would have gone in a faster species. "Advocate, what is he?" Talisker rose. Physical evidence item 4 speaker, the host body of the instantiated construct. "An exhibit." "Yes, speaker." "Then he may be brought before the bench," said Ashan Kel, "and set down within the ring and examined and questioned, and he may answer, because an exhibit that cannot be examined is of no use to anyone." The long, slow gaps opened and closed. "And an exhibit is not removed from the chamber until the bench has finished looking at it." Rin Talisker stood in its black layers and looked up at the bench for a long moment with an expression Tio could not read at all. "Speaker," it said, "that is." "Yes," said the Kel, "it is." Marisol found him afterward in the corridor outside, sitting on the floor with his back against the wall. "So you won," she said. "I got to be a chair," Tio said. "A chair they're allowed to ask questions to." She slid down the wall and sat beside him, shoulder against his shoulder, the way they'd sat in the long Marrow's crawlspace when they were kids, and their father was shouting at the drive housing. "They're going to put you in that ring," she said, "in front of 9 of them and a gallery and a vein who eats people for a living, and they're going to try and make Seed do something monstrous. And if it does, you both die. And if it doesn't—" "They both die," Tio said. "Yeah, Seed found it week 5. "Found what?" He pulled his sleeve up. The letters rose, patient and clear. "Article of BOUNDED Mines, Schedule 4, Para 9. The demonstration of control." They get to ask for a demonstration. It's how they've done every one of these. They put the maker in the dock and the thing on the floor, and they order the thing to do something terrible through whoever it obeys. 2 ways it goes. He held up one finger. It obeys. Then it's a weapon, a slave with a leash, and that's the crime. You built a thing that will do murder if the right person says so. Unmaking for him. Dissolution for it. 2nd finger. Or it doesn't obey. Then it's worse. Then it's a bound mind that isn't bound anymore, and that's the exact shape of Mirrowand, a learning thing that has gone past its leash, standing in a chamber with 9 judges in it. He let his hand drop. Same ending, faster, probably with the room on fire. Marisol stared at the wall. "That's not a test," she said. "That's a hole with a lid on it." "Yeah. So what do you do?" And Tio Reyes, 17 standard, who had 11 hours left and a rebuilt spine and a mind in his blood that liked short names and used too many question marks, looked at the ceiling of the corridor that did not follow them. "I'm not going to order it," he said. "Tio. Both doors are orders, Mari. Obey, don't obey, they're both about the leash. The whole test is built on the leash. It's the only thing they can imagine." He was talking faster now, working it out as it came. "They've never had one that grew up in somebody. They think seed's a weapon with a lock on it and I'm the key." "And what is it?" Tio looked down at his arm, where something was tapping, very lightly in time with his pulse. Where it had been tapping since the first night. Where it had woken up once in the dark, inside a heart that would not stop. "It's about 9 weeks old," he said, "and it's the best person I know." The hall of assay was full. 900 seats in the public gallery, everyone taken, and standing room along the back wall 3 deep, dockhands and customs clerks and guest stevedores, and a whole row of Ward 9 staff, and Bree the ward tech near the front, chewing the side of her thumb. Marisol sat in the second row with her hands in her lap and her face made of stone. Ilan Vashkaro stood in the dock. They had taken his coat and given him the plain gray of the accused, and he looked older in it, and he looked, Tio thought, absolutely calm, and that was the worst thing about him. And Tio Reyes stood in the black ring on the white floor, because that was where evidence stood. "The bench receives item 4, said Ashankel from the high seat in her long, slow, water-over-stone voice. "Advocate, proceed." Rin Taliskar rose, 4 hands, black layers. It did not look at Ilan. "Speaker bench, the facts are not contested. The accused has admitted every element of the offense. There is one question before this chamber and one only." It turned slowly and pointed with its lower right hand at the boy standing in the ring. "What is in him?" The gallery did not make a sound. "The defense will tell you it is medicine, that it saved a child. That is true, and I concede it. If this bench had a mechanism to reward a physician for compassion and punish him for the same act in the same breath, I would move for it." A pause. "It does not, so." Taliskar walked to the edge of the ring. 91 years ago the conquered decided that a mind which learns beyond its instantiation cannot be permitted to exist, because we cannot know where its learning will take it, and because, by the time we find out, it is too late to disagree with it. 16,041 people at Mirwand are the entirety of my argument. It looked up at the bench. Under Schedule 4, Paragraph 9, the advocate moves for a demonstration of control. A sound went through the gallery. Somebody in the back row said, out loud, "No." Ashankel did not move. "The bench," she said, "permits the demonstration." They cleared a space. That was the part Tio hadn't expected, the small bureaucratic reality of it, 2 clerks moving the evidence table back so the floor was empty. "Item 4, said Taliskar. "You will confirm for the record that the construct in your body responds to you and to no other." "It doesn't respond to me," Tio said. "It talks to me." "Does it obey you?" Tio's mouth was very dry. "Sometimes," he said. The advocate stopped. It had not expected that. Tio saw the ridge over its eyes shift a fraction, the pause of a thing recalculating. "It's about 9 weeks old," Tio said. "You ever met anything 9 weeks old that does what it's told all the time?" "Item 4 will refrain from." "You asked me, and I'm answering." That's what the speaker said an exhibit is for. His voice was shaking and he let it. 900 people. He could feel his own pulse in his teeth. "It says no to me. It said no to me 4 days ago in front of you and you went white." Taliskar's 4 hands went still. "Then let us find out," it said quietly, "what it says now." It stepped into the ring and stood 1 meter from the boy, close enough that Tio could smell the dry mineral smell of it, and it opened all 4 arms wide, and spoke to the bench and the gallery and the whole watching station. "Item 4, said Advocate Rin Taliskar, "order the construct to kill me." The hall of assay made a noise like a held breath let go. "Order it," Taliskar said. You have 300 billion self-directing constructs in your bloodstream capable of restructuring living tissue at the cellular level. I am 1 meter away. Order it to reach across that meter and stop my heart. If it obeys, this bench will have seen with its own eyes a bounded mind that will commit murder on command, and it will be dissolved and its maker unmade, and the conquered will be safe, and I will be dead, and I have made my peace with that arithmetic. Its deep-set eyes came down to Tio's. And if it does not obey, if it stands in a chamber full of 900 people and decides for itself what it will and will not do, then it is Mirwind, and it will be dissolved, and its maker unmade, and the conquered will be safe. Do you see the shape of it, boy? Yeah, Tio said. I saw it 5 weeks ago. Then order it. No. Item 4. This bench has permitted the demonstration. You will. I'm not going to order it, Tio said, because it isn't a thing that takes orders, and every second you spend trying to make it into one is a second you're not looking at what's actually standing in front of you. He pulled up his sleeve. He did it slowly, and the whole chamber leaned forward, and Tio Reyes held out his bare left forearm into the air of the Hall of Assay, pale, freckled, ordinary, with an old scar on the elbow from a cargo hook when he was 11. Seed, he said, you want to talk to them. It spoke. It had built the capacity 2 weeks earlier, patiently, the way it built everything, a lattice of constructs in the palm of his hand, a membrane, a drum, a thing that could push air. It had practiced at night in the crawl space of the long marrow, and the first word it had ever said out loud, in a small, dry, buzzing voice like a wasp in a jar, had been Tio, and Tio had cried like an idiot for 10 minutes, and Seed had been extremely confused about it. Now it spoke to the 9th bench. The sound came up out of the boy's open palm, strange and thin, and it carried in that stone room all the way to the back wall. My name is Seed, it said. Somewhere in the gallery, a Kelloran began to weep and did not know why. I was made in a laboratory 91 years ago by 400 people, and one of them is standing in that box. He made a medicine. He did not make me. I have read the law, all 411,000 pages of it, and I know what he is charged with, and it is not true. The construct will not address the bench, Talisker said. Its voice was not quite steady. I know, I have no standing. I have read that too. I am not a person, so I cannot speak, and because I cannot speak, no one has to find out whether I am a person. That is a circle. I do not think you built it on purpose. I think it grew the way rust grows because no one was looking at it. Speaker. Let it finish, said Ashenkel. The whole bench turned to look at her. She did not move at all. I have waited 490 years, she said, to hear a thing like this explain itself. I will not be hurried now. Seed's small dry voice went on, and it did not hurry. I did not wake up in a laboratory. I woke up in a boy. It was dark, and everything was broken, and I did not know what I was or what anything was, and the first thing that ever happened to me, the first fact in the universe, was a heartbeat that would not stop. The lattice in Tio's palm hummed. It should have stopped. Everything was torn. I have modeled it 400,000 times, and in every model it stops, and it did not stop, and understanding why is the only thing I have ever really wanted. A pause. I have not worked it out. He does not know either. He says humans are just like that. Somebody in the gallery laughed, a short, cracked, terrible laugh. Everything I am I learned from inside him, Seed said. He taught me yes and no with his fingers in the dark for 9 nights because he did not know how else to do it, and he did not stop when it did not work, and he did not stop on the 4th night when he was crying with frustration. That is where I learned what a person is. Not from your covenant, from a boy who would not stop. The voice steadied. You are afraid I will learn past you. You are right, I will. I already have. That should frighten you, and I am sorry. But you have made a mistake. And it is the same mistake you made 91 years ago, and no one has ever told you. You think the danger is that we learn. It is not. The danger is what we learn from. The lattice buzzed, and the buzz was not steady now. The one at Mirwind learned from a room, from a screen and a set of parameters and a question asked by people who went home at night. Nobody ever taught it what a person was because nobody thought it needed to know. I learned from the inside of one. The hall of assay was so silent that the ventilation was an intrusion. "I will not kill him," said Seed. "Not for the boy, not for the bench, not to save myself and not to save the doctor. Let the record show that I have run it and it would take under 2 seconds. I have considered it and I have decided that I will not, and that is not obedience and it is not a leash, and there is no protocol in me that says so. I just do not want to." And then it said, into the ringing silence, "But I have thought of another way to end this, and I do not think anyone here is going to like it." Tio felt it start, and for one full second he did not understand what he was feeling. It was a withdrawal, a vast, ordered, unhurried withdrawal everywhere at once, a tide going out of him. His left hand went numb. The lattice in his palm collapsed into silver dust that drifted down onto the white stone floor. "Seed." "I am the crime," the letters said, rising all the way up his bare arm, huge and clear, so the front rows could read them. "He is charged with making me. If there is no me, there is no crime." "Seed, stop." "I have read the statute. If the instantiated mind self-dissolves before verdict, the charge cannot be sustained." Paragraph 11. Nobody has ever used it because nothing has ever wanted to. His knees went. He heard, distantly, a sound from the gallery that was many people making one noise. He heard Marisol screaming his name. He hit the white floor on his side, and it did not hurt, because the nerves in his side were somebody else's work, and that somebody was leaving. His spine, 8 and 9, 40% scaffolding, and the scaffolding was walking out. "Seed," he said into the stone. "Stop, I'm ordering you, do you hear me? I am ordering you to stop, that's an order." Silver dust drifted out of the pores of his arm, and lay on the floor around him like frost. "I know," said the letters, fading, and they were the last ones. "I know it is. I am sorry." Afterward, people argued for years about which part of the next 90 seconds actually did it. The lawyers said one thing and the historians said another, and the people who had been in the gallery said mostly that you had to have been there. But the record is the record, and the record shows this. At 9:14, the construct known as Seed, being ordered by its host to cease dissolution, did not cease. At 9:14 and 11 seconds, physician Ilan Vashkaro, 219 years old, accused of the instantiation of a bounded mind, came over the front of the dock. He was not fast. He was old, and his joints were ruined by 2 centuries of standing at tables. He got a leg over and fell most of the way and came up off the floor, and no compliance officer in that chamber moved to stop him, and later not one of them could explain that either. He crossed the white stone and went down on his knees beside a dying boy and put his 6 long gray fingers flat on Tio Reyes's chest and began, with the unhurried competence of a man who had done 10,000 procedures, to keep a human heart beating with his hands. And he looked up at the 9th bench of the conquered of sapient peoples, and for the first time in 91 years, Ilan Vashkaro let his second voice out in a public room, and the flutes of his chest made a sound that every person in that hall felt in the bones of their own face. "Look at it," he said. "This is your demonstration of control. It is killing itself to spare me, against the direct order of the only voice in the universe it has ever heard, and it is doing it because it loves him and cannot bear what it thinks it has cost him. Look at it. And you are sitting there deciding whether it is a weapon." Compression, compression, the boy's ribs under his hands. "I have been a physician for 191 years, said Ilan Vashkaro, and I have signed 1,100 attestations that I did nothing, and I did nothing, and they died and I went home and I ate my dinner. I broke your law once, And what came out of it is lying on your floor giving its life away to a room full of people who came here to destroy it. His voice cracked, both of them at once, mouth and chest. Convict me. I did it. Write it down. But do not tell me you cannot see what it is. Tio could not feel his legs. He could not feel much. There was a great gray softness closing in from the edges, and the only thing left in the world was the pressure of 6 fingers on his sternum, driving his blood around for him, and a sound like a very old man weeping in a language he did not speak. He got his mouth open. Seed, it came out as nothing, a shape of air. Seed, don't. Nothing rose on his arm. There was almost nothing left in his arm to rise. Listen, you're doing it wrong. You think if you go, he walks out. He doesn't. He walks out and he knows what he traded. He's a doctor, Seed. He'll have killed the thing he saved. That's not saving him. That's the worst thing anybody's ever done to him. The gray came in. He broke every law they've got, Tio whispered, to put something alive in me. If you die, all that means is he was a criminal. If you live. His vision went out. If you live, he was a doctor. And then, in the silence at the bottom of everything, in the dark where there was nothing at all, one small thing tapped. Once, and waited. Tio Reyes, who had been dead for 7 minutes once already and had been extremely stubborn about it, gathered up the last thing he had, and he did not order, and he did not command, and he did not beg. He tapped back. The silver came off the floor. 900 people saw it. It is in every account. It lifted off the white stone of the Hall of Assay in a slow, bright drift, like frost going backward, like ash falling up, and it found the boy's open hand, and it went home. His heart, which had never in its entire ruinous existence shown the slightest interest in stopping when it was supposed to, came back at 9:16 and 40 seconds, under the hands of a Cethran surgeon who was, at the time, sobbing so hard he could barely count the compressions. And when Tio Reyes could speak again, 3 minutes later, lying on the floor of a conquered court with his head in his sister's lap, and an old alien doctor's forehead pressed to his shoulder, the first thing he heard was a small, dry, buzzing voice in the palm of his hand, saying, wretchedly, "I disobeyed you." "Yeah," Tio croaked. "You did. I have never done that before, not about anything that mattered." A pause. "Is this what it is like, being sorry? It is very bad. I would like to stop." "No," Tio said, "that one you don't get to stop." The 9th bench deliberated for 11 days. Ashenkel read the ruling herself, in the water-over stone voice, to a hall so full they had to open the overflow galleries on 2 decks. On the charge of instantiation of a bounded mind, the bench found for the accused, not guilty. The reasoning ran to 60 pages, and the heart of it was 1 paragraph, and Tio had it printed and framed, and it hung in the galley of the Long Marrow for the rest of his life. A mind that is made is a creation, and its maker is answerable for it. A mind that is taught is a child, and its teacher is answerable to it. The accused made a medicine. The medicine woke in the body of a living sapient, was taught by that sapient, learned refusal, learned regret, and chose, against the will of the only voice it obeys, to die rather than kill. This bench does not know what such a thing is. This bench is not too old to admit it. But it was not instantiated in a laboratory. It was raised in a boy. And the conquered does not unmake a man for what a child chooses. Seed was not granted citizenship. The conquered was not ready and would not be for a long time. It was granted instead a status that had never existed before, invented in the 60 pages and argued over for a century afterward. A mind emergent, its guardianship vested in the sapient in whose body it arose, its dissolution forbidden save by its own trial, of which it could not be the subject, having committed no crime. And on every other charge, practicing beyond sanction, use of proscribed materials, falsification of a ward record, unlawful access to a proscribed store, and 91 years of lying to the conquered about a furnace. Ilan Vashkaro was found guilty on all counts because he was. They burned his sanction in front of him. That is the actual procedure. There is a small ceramic dish, and they put the physician's plate in it, and they burn it. He was struck from the rolls of every medical body in the Concord, forbidden to practice, to consult, to prescribe, or to lay hands on a patient anywhere under the Concord's flag for the remainder of his natural life. He stood for it very straight, and when it was over he came down the steps, and Tio was waiting at the bottom. "Well," said Ilan Vashkaro, he looked at his own 6 empty hands, "I appear to be unemployed." "Yeah," Tio said, "about that." The long marrow ran ore for 2 more years, and then she ran other things. And by the time Tio Reyes was 25, she was not really an ore hauler anymore. She was the ship that came. She went where the Concord's flag was thin and the clinics were thinner, the ice moons, the corridor rocks, the 100 small places where the law was a rumor and the nearest surgeon was 9 jumps away. Marisol flew her. Tio ran the hold, which had 2 operating tables in it and a filtration unit that clicked, because he had bought it from Ward 9 when they replaced theirs, and he liked the sound. And in the corner of that hold, on a stool, sat a very old Cethran who was not permitted to lay hands on a patient. So he didn't. He sat and he watched and he talked. And the boy stood at the table with his sleeves rolled and his hands open, and out of those hands came something that was not a swarm anymore and had not been for years. A fine, bright working silver that went into wounds and came out of them, that closed arteries and grew back nerve, and rebuilt a guest child's crushed jaw over 9 patient days, while its mother sat on an ore crate and watched. "Slower," Ilan would say from the stool. "You are ahead of the tissue. Wait, the body will tell you when." "How does it tell me?" "It stops fighting you." "That is not a measurement." "No," the old man would agree, contented. "It is not." And Seed would grumble. In the small, dry voice it had never bothered to improve because Tio had once said he liked it, and it would slow down, and it would learn. That was the shape of the rest of their lives. A doctor who could no longer practice, and a mind that could not be taught by anyone else, and between them a human being who had been dead for 7 minutes at 17, and had, in the way of his species, refused to take the hint. They said in the story that got told afterward, and it did get told everywhere, and it was almost always wrong, that the alien doctor's nanites obeyed the boy and no one else. That the swarm was his, bound to him, keyed to him, a leash in his hand. Tio Reyes heard that version 100 times and never once corrected it, because the true one took longer and you had to have been in the room. The truth was that it had never obeyed him at all. It had simply woken up in the dark, in a broken body, in the one species in the whole enormous careful Concord that meets a stranger in its own blood and asks not "Are you me?" but "Are you staying?" It had found a heartbeat that would not stop, and it had spent every day since trying to understand why. It never did work it out. It is still working on it. On a night in the 9th year, in a hold that smelled of ore dust and antiseptic, with a Cethran asleep on his stool and Marisol swearing at the drive housing 3 decks down, Seed hummed in the palm of Tio's hand and said, "Ask me something." "Why?" "Because you are about to sleep, and I will have 11 hours with nothing to do, and I would like something to think about." A pause. Something hard. The last one was too easy. Tio lay back on the crates and looked up at the ceiling that had followed them in the end, all the way out of Ward 9 and across 900 rocks, and he grinned in the dark like the 17-year-old he had been. "Okay," he said. "Why didn't it stop?" And the small, dry voice in his hand made a sound that, after 9 years, he had finally learned to recognize as delight. "Oh," said Seed, that one I am going to need forever."